once told somebody that I'd kiss a dust-off pilot's butt on the courthouse square and give him a week to draw a crowd.
Wait, what? I'll bet you're wondering who would say such a thing. Well, the voice you're hearing belongs to Bob Stewart. That is Brigadier General and NASA astronaut Bob Stewart.
Now, I hope that doesn't make it onto the tape.
Oh, no, General. We'd never include such a thing in our podcast. And we certainly wouldn't play it twice. Unless it shed light on something very important, which in this case, it does. General Stewart flew more than 1,000 hours of combat time in Vietnam from August 1966 to 1967, primarily as a fire team leader in the Armed Helicopter Platoon of A Company, 101st Aviation Battalion. He went on to log nearly 300 hours in outer space, 12 of those outside the spacecraft. The man has made a career out of facing extreme danger. And how does he feel about the men who flew dust-off in Vietnam?
I'd kiss a dust-off pilot's butt on the courthouse square and give him a week to draw a crowd.
But why?
They allowed us to do things that we would not ordinarily have done because I knew that I had a really good chance of getting them to pull me out.
General Stewart is talking here with our good friends over at Witness to War, who graciously shared the interview with us. You can hear the entire thing at witnesstowar.org.
We used to fly a Firefly mission at night down the canal lines in the Delta using the nose-mounted searchlight. This is the way we started out this thing. So I'm down inside the canal line between the trees looking for sampans. I'm a sitting duck, you know. Dustoff always went with us. And I figured, okay, if I get shot down, he's going to be there to try to get me out. So I could do stupid things like that. And let's face it, that's a pretty stupid thing to do. Later on, when we started flying with searchlights mounted on a slick helicopter, things got a little bit better, and then the Dustoff guys got orders that they were not to accompany us anymore. They said, no, we're going to go with you anyway. And so they trailed us for, I guess, another month or two until they finally got caught, and then we had to do it on our own. But I'll tell you, I felt really good having those guys close by. Dustoff, they're a bunch of angels as far as I'm concerned. They were a blessing.
In the first two episodes of this series, we made a pretty big deal out of the impact that Dustoff had during the Vietnam War. We talked a lot about the numbers, how roughly 3,400 pilots, medics, and crew chiefs, most between the ages of 18 and 21, saved an estimated 900,000 lives. But what about the secondary impacts? For example, how many lives were saved because Bob Stewart was emboldened by the mere presence of Dustoff to do what he calls stupid things? How many people are walking the earth today because their fathers' or grandfathers' lives were saved by Dustoff in Vietnam? How many civilian lives are saved every day around the world thanks to air ambulance operations, techniques, and tactics that were pioneered by Dustoff crews? In our third and final episode about Dustoff, we'll take a broader look at the legacy of these men. Stick around. From the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, founders of The Wall, this is Echoes of the Vietnam War. I'm your host, Michael Crone, bringing you stories of service, sacrifice, and healing from people who still feel the impact of that conflict more than 50 years later. Episode 82, Dustoff, Part 3, right after this.
Hi, I'm Anne Margaret. I went to Vietnam to entertain the troops in 1966 and 1968. My guys, my gentlemen, if you lived through the Vietnam War era, you know the impact that the war had. But today, we are in danger of history being lost. Current generations know very little about the war or the people who served. As more of our Vietnam vets pass away each day, their stories are being lost to history. Together, we can change that. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund is the organization that built the wall. It works to ensure that future generations will understand the war's impact. Let's help keep the promise that the wall was built on. Never forget. Visit vvmf.org to find out how you can get involved.
That's the problem. Oh, okay.
I'm serious.
In Leipzig, Delaware, about 7 miles from Dover, a family gathers for dinner. At one end of the table sits Vietnam veteran Joe Start, Jr., and at the other end sits his wife, Joan. The two of them built this house and have lived in it for about 45 years. They're joined at the table by their 2 grown children, Joe III and Katie, their spouses, and an unspecified number of grandchildren who all live close enough to have walked here from houses that Joe and Joan built for them. It's a beautiful scene. Now imagine Joan sitting at the same table, alone. Because if Joe doesn't come home from Vietnam, nobody else is at this table. And Joe doesn't come home from Vietnam without Dustoff.
Believe me.
That's Joe.
I kind of think about that all the time, too, you know. I mean, these guys, you saved my life so I could come home and have a beautiful family.
Like a lot of Vietnam veterans, Joe is the son of a World War II vet. Joe Start Sr. had been an infantry soldier and received a Purple Heart after being shot in the back near the Rhine River. Joe Jr. adored his father and wanted to be just like him. When his draft notice arrived in 1969, Joe Jr. did not hesitate. He joined the Army in early July and arrived in Vietnam a few days before Christmas. He was assigned to the 25th Infantry Division at Cu Chi as an M79 Grenadier. Joe's unit saw action early and often. He lost friends within his first month or two in country. On September 26, 1970, Joe very nearly lost his own life when a group of friendly forces mistook Joe's outfit for the enemy and fired on them.
I heard the M79 go off, and we fired back at them. They fired at us. And what had happened, a scout dog had alerted on us. And that's where I guess they thought we were VC or whatever. But, you know, 2 or 3 guys that's got blonde hair, you know, they don't look like VC. But I think what they did is they held back a little bit just to make sure. And then they laid down a base of fire, and then that's when we got into it. I went on to cover this growth by a bridge, and I thought to myself, I said, if this is VC, they're going to have to come get me because I ain't surrendering. And I was in some water, and I had my head, you know, under some growth. Then when they quit firing on us, my buddy come to get me, and I had a hard time getting on the bridge because my thumb was blew off, you know, or just hanging. And I went to reach for the bridge, and I heard this real loud noise in the back, you know, on my back. I heard and I reached up on the bridge, and I had a hole in my back where it collapsed my lung. And
what caused the hole in your back?
The M79 blast.
Okay.
You know, it hit a tree, and I guess some of the shrapnel come off of there or whatever. It hit me in the back, hit me in the neck, hit me in the arm. After things had calmed down, they called a Dustoff in, and my buddy carried me on. Well, 2 of them carried me on the litter, got me to the chopper. I asked the medic, because my lung was collapsed, and I said, can you help me breathe. I said, I can't breathe. He said, the only way I can help you is if you pass out. I said, well, knock me out then. But, it helped me breathe. And man, oh man, I'm cold and shivering, and you'll be all right, patting me on the head. You'll be okay. You'll be okay. How can you tell me I'm going to be all right and I'm the one blowed up? But they helped, and they try to get you to laugh. And I got to the hospital, and they jumped on me right away, and they were going to finish cutting my thumb off. I said, no, don't do that. I said, I'll come over here with it. I'm going to go home with it. The doctor said if it had been two centimeters or whatever it is, hit my spine, I'd have been paralyzed. But just thank God that I made it. They're a godsend, I'm telling you. A lot of people don't understand what the medics and the chopper pilots went through. Mm-hmm. My hat's off for them, buddy. If it hadn't been for the Dustoff guys, medics and stuff, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be talking to you. And they really, they got to my heart. And I'll tell you, Michael, you don't know how much they mean to me. Because I'll tell you, if it hadn't been for them guys running all them missions and, 18, 19 years old flying helicopters, who would ever thought about that, And just going out there and doing what they were supposed to do, But they said, well, that was our job.
The biggest thrill right today is meeting somebody we actually picked up.
Dustoff medic Mike Logan. He's the one who gave me Joe Start's phone number.
And I tell you that just warms our hearts so much. I can't tell you how good that makes us feel, because we had no idea what was happening to these guys once we dropped them off. We knew they were alive, but we had no idea what happened to them after they went to the hospital in Tokyo or Germany or Honolulu or wherever they went, and then finally home again.
You just think that you could be in a Christmas play.
I got it. The Christmas card this year. The baby can be put in a manger and George
While the experience and impact of the Vietnam Dustoff cruise was unique, their homecoming was not. Back in the world, people, for the most part, didn't distinguish one Vietnam veteran from another. There wasn't a lot of nuance in their reactions. Here's Mike Logan again.
It was such a shocker. I mean, we were just absolutely floored the way we were treated when we got home. And being blamed for the war and being blamed for whatever, that shut us up for quite a few years.
I talked to a lot of guys who've dealt with, some form or other of post-traumatic stress. And, it's almost like your crews knew nothing but. You guys didn't know anything but trauma, right?
Well,
you took fire every day. You dealt with death every day. Every day. Yeah, you do. It was, you just had to get tough about it, I guess. You had to just continually think, like I say, positive about, we're going to save this guy. We're going to save this guy.
And that's all you focused on, basically.
When you
And,
came home, that stuff must have.
well, people here made us bury it. We could not release ourselves. I go to a vet center every week now. We have about 20, 25 of us are all Vietnam veterans from all walks, every kind of job you can think of in every service is represented there. And what we do is that we really study PTSD because people didn't understand us. They really couldn't understand us. They didn't want to understand us either. And they kind of blamed us as we were coming home for what they were watching on TV. You know what I mean? It's kind of like you're the fault of all this or whatever. The blame was on the soldier, basically, and which was unfortunate. But all of us really had to put it aside and just what we did was we used our skills that we had learned in the service to just control our life the best we could. Most of us were fairly successful. Many of the pilots became airline pilots. I was, biotechnician. Some of them, medics became nurses. Others became police officers. Some became lawyers. We had all sorts of walks of life that came out of that war. Most of us were successful in that sense. And we've had to learn a lot to overcome this. And now we can, and we can see the kids that are coming from Afghanistan and Iraq are having some of the same problems we did. In fact, we invite, in our group, Iraqi soldiers and men or women that can come and listen to us. And they have the same problems. They have the same problems at just a different scenario. War does that to you no matter where you're at. Anytime somebody's trying to kill you and you have to kill somebody, it's definitely going to affect your mind and your body and your persona, everything.
Yeah.
And, you're in war, and then 24 hours later, you're home. There's no downtime. There's no time to reflect or have somebody talk to you about what you just did.
Yeah,
you're just there.
Very
and then you're in the middle
transition.
And people didn't want to talk about it. They looked at you like you were some anomaly that shouldn't be in the same room. And but I think our military training helped us to just get through that and to move on as best we could. But we had it inside, and we definitely held it back for many years. What really helped me a lot, and I recommend all the servicemen that I see, is getting back to your unit. So when we started our association 20 years ago, that was fabulous. I resisted, and finally one of the medics kept calling me, and I finally answered the phone, and he invited me to the reunion, and I came, and it was like a door opening. I saw my pilots. I saw my compadres, my buds, my brothers.
What year was this?
I was 203 or 4. I can't remember. 2000.
So 30 plus years after you came home.
Yeah, after, and it just wow. It is. I can't tell you how it's helped me. It's been fantastic, especially when I meet a guy I flew with, and we remember what we did. Pilots that I flew with, crew chiefs that I flew with. It was fantastic, and it really unleashed a lot of stuff that we've had, and it's helped everybody that's ever come to our union, I hope.
We'll be back with more about the legacy of Vietnam Dustoff after a short break. Stick around.
Let's talk about the wall for a minute.
It is widely considered to be the memorial that changed memorials forever. Its design invites a level of engagement, of introspection, of reverence that no fountain, no statue of a cannon or a man on a horse could ever match. The volunteers who work there often talk about wall magic, that unexpected, often spiritual connection or discovery that happens when you visit the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. It's one of the reasons why the wall's design has inspired so many other memorials around the world. Of course, there is one little problem with the wall's design. 140 panels of polished black granite aren't exactly portable. So, unless you can get yourself to Washington, D.C., how are you supposed to experience wall magic for yourself? Well, guess what? We already thought of that. In 1996, VVMF unveiled an exact replica of the wall that could be packed into an 18-wheeler and hauled to cities and towns all across America. Since then, the wall that heals has been displayed in nearly 700 communities throughout the nation, spreading the healing legacy of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial to millions of visitors. Sure, there are other versions of the wall that travel around the country, but the wall that heals is the only one that is an exact replica of the one in Washington, created and maintained by the same organization that built the wall in the first place. And not only that, the wall that heals is accompanied and curated by VVMF employees who work with host communities to ensure that the experience is as close as possible to the real thing. And that includes wall magic. But you don't have to take my word for it. You can check out episode 15 of this podcast to learn what happens to people's hearts when this traveling exhibit rolls into a real-life American community. The Wall That Heals and the Mobile Education Center that travels with it will be in Bridgeport, Connecticut, September 26 through 29, and Covington, Virginia, October 3 through 6. To see the rest of this year's tour schedule and to learn how you can bring the Wall That Heals to your town, visit vvmf.org. For many Vietnam veterans, the sound of a Huey was the sound of hope. It meant that help was on the way, often in the form of a Dustoff or medevac helicopter. But unless you or a loved one were there, the story of Dustoff and its impact may not be familiar. There have been individuals from Dustoff whose stories have been widely told. For example, Dustoff pilot Patrick Brady's heroics have been celebrated, but that's what happens when you receive the Medal of Honor. Pilot Michael Novosel, medic Louis Rocco, and crew chief Dennis Fuji have also received the Medal of Honor. But as a group, Dustoff's contributions during the Vietnam War and since then have gone largely unrecognized by the citizenry. Until now. As of last week, both houses of Congress have passed bills to award Vietnam Dustoff the highest civilian honor that our nation can bestow, the Congressional Medal of Honor. To find out more, I spoke with Chris Wingate. His father and uncle both served as Dustoff pilots in Vietnam, and Chris flew Dustoff in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Chris is also the president of the Dustoff Association, which you can find at dustoff.org.
My dad was a enlisted soldier and then became a warrant officer and deployed to Vietnam, October 69 to October 70. And about 6 months in, was promoted to second lieutenant and flew all over Vietnam, based out of Chu Lai, and Dustoff 5-7 with the 54th Med. And he flew Vietnam for a year, flew over 1,100 hours in a year, which anybody that's flown helicopters understands that's a lot of hours in a year. Just for context, I think even with 2.5 deployments at the time, it took me about 6 years to cross 1,000 hours.
Holy moly.
And I was pretty busy my first 2 deployments flying this mission. So pretty incredible. And it really is, just foreshadow really what everyone else flew. I mean, those guys flew like crazy and did a lot to save a lot of lives. So pretty incredible looking back at it.
Did he talk much about it when you were growing up? Did he share much about that experience?
Not a whole lot. I mean, I obviously asked a lot of questions growing up. I think I remember him as a major when I was younger, and my older sisters were home, and he was TDY often, but always home, always engaged. And I remember really just asking questions about the Army and what he did. But even when I decided to apply for an Army ROTC scholarship at TCU, Texas Christian University in Fort Worth, Texas, and then pursue flight school, I didn't really know until I would ask him. When I finally came on deployment orders, I asked him a little bit about his deployment. And that was probably the first time we really talked about it. And it was interesting because he could tell me all the stories, but you don't really know until you're in it yourself. It's all this theoretical concept. And so until you're actually in the thick of it and you're on the front lines, so to speak, it's a totally different feeling. So he definitely brought up some of the missions he flew and the challenges of flying back then. And he towards the trail end of his career was a part of some significant changes from the UH-1 to the UH-60 Blackhawk, no night vision goggles to night vision goggles, which of course is a game changer for us owning the night. And, hearing the stories of what he did and some of these other heroes did in Vietnam under the worst conditions possible, just amazing to me. And I knew I wanted to save lives after hearing some of his stories and hearing, just the incredible sense of satisfaction going through knowing you brought someone home and giving them a second chance at life and a second chance to come back to their family, or in some cases start a family of their own. That was very appealing to me early on in my military career. And so what year was it that you became an officer? So I commissioned at a TCU in December of 2003. I was a football player at TCU, walk-on football player. And so I played my last football game against Boise State. And 2 days later, I was commissioned the day before the final bowl game, played in my final bowl game, and went on active duty that following Monday. So started as a second lieutenant gold bar recruiter at TCU. Did that while I was waiting for my OBC slot at Fort Sam Houston, and then went to flight school immediately right after that, back in, I want to say it was March of 2004. Can you talk a little bit about your combat experience? Sure. Yeah. My first deployment was back in October 2005, and I was a pretty new first lieutenant at that point. And I deployed 4 total times to combat, twice to Iraq, twice to Afghanistan. And did you fly different types of aircraft? I flew almost every variant of the Black Hawk. As you're gathering this combat experience across the scope of those 4 deployments, how does the conversation with your father change? I think, we always have that banter back and forth, of course, because I think he finished with just over 3,300 hours and 25 years. And I think I finished at about, 2,200 in the aircraft and another probably 800 or 900 in the simulator. So I didn't quite catch him in totality of all my hours. So he likes to jab with me a little bit on that. But he also admitted, though, he's like, he did a lot more deployments than I did, though. So, we joke about that, but, we definitely overlap in some areas. The first two deployments in particular had some challenging missions and did a lot of good. Our team did a lot of good all throughout our region in Iraq, and just a great sense of knowing you've done something well. And there's also a big sense of relief after every mission when you come back safely, unharmed, and you've done everything you can to save those lives.
I wonder, in your training and just culturally, among the people who had your job, how conscious do you think people are about the sort of seminal role that Vietnam Dustoff pilots in particular played in just inventing the job?
I think over the last 20 years, we've done a really good job trying to make it right for how Vietnam veterans came home. And part of doing that right is telling their stories and making sure you highlight what they've done and the impact they've made. And so I think the more we're in this mission, and the longer I was in, the more I realized how much Vietnam Dustoff crews really revolutionized Army medical evacuation by developing innovative tactics, techniques, procedures that improve the speed and efficiency and effectiveness of battlefield medical evacuation. And I think that legacy is still felt today in military medical evacuation practices.
Is there an example that you can think of something that those guys pioneered that still informs the way that the job is done technically, tactically, operationally?
Yeah, sure. First is, of course, utilization of dedicated medevac assets. So this was the first large-scale war that we used medevac helicopters, where they were dedicated solely to the mission of medevac, meaning they are on 24/7 standby, ready to respond at a moment's notice. There were also other crews, and I will delineate here between Dustoff and medevac in Vietnam because it was different back then, as I think you've spoken about before. But Dustoff specifically, unarmed, dedicated medevac asset, with a standardized cabin where they were all the same. And everyone had the sole purpose of being on standby to respond and evacuate the wounded off the battlefield. And they were also unarmed. So those are a couple ways that they did it right back then. And that continues to set us apart on the world stage in our ability to take care of our own and never leave somebody behind. Couple other ways is just the rapid response and the on-demand medevac. You've heard spoken, I'm sure, the golden hour before, practices of getting the patient to the higher level of care in less than an hour from the time the injury occurs. Those guys, excuse me, those guys operate under this principle that no one should be left behind, and regardless of the risk to crew, they would put themselves at risk. Regardless of the enemy threat. I mean, they set that example and we stuck with it. The standardized triage and in-flight medical care, that's something that they pioneered, the importance of en-route care to make sure that you can extend the life of the patient till you get them to the higher level of care and you pass it off to the next provider. Those triage techniques that they developed to prioritize the most critically wounded first, and even how you stack them in the aircraft, in the back of that aircraft. Those concepts have been carried forward even today. Those are a few things. A few others are the night and all-weather operations. There were very few things that kept them back from flying and executing mission. My dad told me about a story where he did a night pickup in the mountains in the valley, in the mountains in a bowl that was socked in from clouds. And mind you, they have no night vision goggles at the time. So I can't imagine flying this mission with poor visibility, less than a mile visibility with no night vision goggles and sheer darkness. And he was going to the LZ to pick up the wounded soldier, and he's on the radio, and they're tag teaming, watching the instruments to make sure they're flying level, and the aircraft commander is flying and trying to just keep the dirty side down, if you will. And as they got closer to the LZ on the radio, he would say, "Okay, pop smoke," and the ground force commander shot a flare in the air through the clouds, and they would see the flare and just spiral down to fly with the flare around it until they got to the ground, which is just wild to me. And I think it would make everyone's hair stand up a little bit to think about actually flying that kind of mission. So it's just, those are the kind of stories that I'm just blown away when I hear them. And I know there's many more like that. And I think there's a couple more field-based casualty collection points. They had casualty collection points all throughout the Dustoff established for evacuation with the ground units, which helped just expand the battlefield and the Army Health System support, or the Army Health System throughout the battlefield, which is what the term has become now. That innovation really became a fundamental part of casualty evacuation and planning in modern military doctrine. A lot of these TTPs have been really incorporated in all of our current Army doctrine, Army medical evacuation doctrine, and joint doctrine that has influenced NATO standards, joint U.S. operations, the importance of timely evacuation and the medical care of soldiers across the battlefield.
I have to believe that, when I turn on the news and I see somebody being airlifted to a level 1 trauma center, from a car accident or some other tragedy, the experience that they're having was also informed by the work that your dad and his comrades did.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've never actually looked at that, but now that you say that, yeah, I would imagine so. I've got a lot of friends that have gone over to fly a civilian medevac because it just correlates really well, and they still have that passion to serve and that passion to save lives, and they also still put their lives at risk, even here, and even when our guys are providing standby medevac support, either on an Army installation or a DoD installation for the local community, which still happens in the United States. There's high risk missions there, in Alaska, even in El Paso at the higher altitudes, so the Franklin Mountains, and they do some incredible things even today here in the States. And,
and I would imagine you mentioned in-flight care. I would imagine that experience today was very much informed by Vietnam Dustoff.
Absolutely. I mean, you can have the hoist in there too, like the ability to evacuate while at a hover from the trees. When you can't get a helicopter in there. That started in Vietnam too.
Yeah.
And that we still use that. I mean, that is now standard on all of our HH-60 Mike helicopters, and it'll be a standard requirement in the Flora medevac variant when that comes out on or about 2032. It's going to be amazing to see. And you see that, we're having the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War on April 30th, 2025. 50 years later, and their impact still being felt. That's amazing.
Which is a perfect segue into a discussion about the Congressional Gold Medal effort.
Yeah.
Can you start just by kind of telling us, reminding us where we are in that process? What has happened, what needs to happen, and why it's so significant?
Yeah, I can absolutely do that. I mean, this is something that I'm very excited about for my dad, for my uncle, for the thousands of Dustoff crews that are finally being recognized for their service and the impact of what they've done. So, the Vietnam Dustoff Crew's Congressional Gold Medal Act has passed the Senate in May of this year, and it passed the House last week on September 17th. And it's, if anyone has ever tried to get a bill passed for something like this, they understand the labor of love that goes in to try to get spotlight on something in a story that may have been lost to history had we not captured it in something like this. And, I'm sitting there watching the House read the bill, and to hear them say the things they're saying about Dustoff crews in Vietnam and the impact that they have, and how this award, the highest civilian award honored by Congress, will be the first of its kind to acknowledge anyone from Vietnam War service. It's incredible. And this serves as a tribute to these crews' unparalleled heroism, and how this will potentially open doors for other deserving stories from that war to be honored. And that's a huge accomplishment. And the last piece of where I'll leave it is it should go to the president's desk this week to be signed into law. We're expecting. And from there, the clock will start. And it's about 2 years from now, we'll see that Congressional Gold Medal presented. So just amazing effort by so many people. And I'm just grateful to have had such a small part in this, and to be able to see it, and to see people like my dad and my uncle recognized for what they've done. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be very cool.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. You mentioned that this is the first time that Congress has recognized really anyone from the Vietnam War in this way, which then provides a template, perhaps, or opens a door for other units to pursue similar recognition.
Yeah.
Do you think, having blazed that trail, it'll be easier for them?
I think for every proposal for a Congressional Gold Medal, there is always an effort that has to go with that. But the glass ceiling has been broken from Vietnam, and from the pain of Vietnam, and from the politics of Vietnam, and how those heroes were welcomed home was unacceptable. And to their credit, they welcomed all of us home in a way that they wished that they had been welcomed home. And so I think at least now the stigma of recognizing Vietnam era heroes is gone, because Dustoff led the way, as we often do. And now we have the opportunity for other people to tell stories and bring them to light, where otherwise they may not have been able to tell them and get the support that they want. I mentioned earlier the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. And every year we do an annual summit to bring our community together. And for the first time ever, we're doing it in Washington, D.C. from April 30th to May 3rd. And we're going to welcome people home the way they should have been welcomed home. And so it's going to be an incredible event. And if you're listening to this and you haven't registered, register. If you want to support, please support us. We have a lot of great things planned to recognize these heroes, and we need partners to help us get there. So we'd love to have you.
Big thanks to Mike Logan, Gary Hagan, Doug Peterson, Joe Start, and Chris Wingate for sharing their stories with us, and also to our good friends at Witness to War. Check out their amazing archive of interviews at witnesstowar.org. Finally, this entire series on Dustoff would not have been possible without the industrial strength support of Steve Vermillion, president of the Vietnam Dustoff Association. Thank you, Steve. We'll be back in 2 weeks with more stories of service, sacrifice, and healing. See you then.
Dustoff, they're a bunch of angels as far as I'm concerned. They were a blessing.